At 1207 hours on November 27, 1940, HMS Renown's forward 15-inch turrets opened fire at the Italian battleship Vittorio Veneto at a range of 26 bisats 400 yards. The shells took 37 seconds to reach their target, arcing through the Mediterranean sky before plunging toward the Italian battleship, steaming southeast at 30 knots. The first salvo fell 400 yards short, sending columns of white water 200 feet into the air. Vice Admiral James Somerville stood on Renown's compass platform watching the fall of shot through his binoculars. He had been chasing the Italian fleet for 3 hours across 60 miles of open water. Now, finally, his flagship was in range to engage. But Vittorio Veneto was faster than Renown by 3 knots, and the range was opening with every minute. Somerville had perhaps 20 minutes to damage the Italian battleship severely enough to slow her down. If he failed, the Italians would escape. If he succeeded, Force H might achieve the first meaningful British naval victory in the Mediterranean since the war began. But Renown was not designed to fight modern battleships. She was a battlecruiser from the previous war, built in 1916, when speed mattered more than armor. Her 6 15-inch guns could penetrate Vittorio Veneto's armor at certain ranges, but Vittorio Veneto's 9 15-inch guns and superior armor protection gave the Italian ship a decisive advantage in sustained combat. Renown would have to hit hard, and hope the Italians chose to withdraw rather than fight. The second salvo adjusted for range. 6 15-inch shells, each weighing 920 pounds, departed the barrels at 2,450 feet per second. The shells climbed to 40,000 feet before descending toward the target. This salvo fell 200 yards short, closer but still not hitting. Renown's gunnery officer, Commander H.B. Crane, watched the splashes through the director telescope and calculated corrections. The target was steaming at 30 knots on a course of 135 degrees. Range was opening at approximately 300 yards per minute. The fire control computer, a Mark V dryer table, processed target course speed and range rate to calculate where the guns needed to aim. The third salvo fired at 1209 hours. This time, one shell struck Vittorio Veneto on the port quarter, penetrating the unarmored deck aft and exploding inside a crew compartment. The explosion killed 3 Italian sailors and started a small fire, but caused no significant damage to the battleship's combat capability. It was Renown's only hit of the engagement. Vittorio Veneto's commander, Admiral Inigo Campioni, ordered an immediate turn away. The Italian battleship heeled into a 30-degree turn to starboard, opening range rapidly, while her aft turret fired at Renown. The Italian shells fell long, missing by 800 yards. Both ships were firing at extreme range, where accuracy was more luck than skill. At 1215 hours, the range had opened to 29,000 yards beyond effective firing range for either ship. Somerville ordered ceasefire. The engagement was over. Vittorio Veneto escaped, joined by her sister ship, Giulio Cesare, and their escort of heavy cruisers and destroyers. Force H was too slow to pursue and too weak to risk a decisive engagement against 2 modern battleships. The action off Cape Spartanto, as it would be recorded in British naval records, was tactically inconclusive. No ships were sunk on either side. The Italian convoy that had been the strategic objective reached its destination safely. The British convoy Force H was escorting also reached its destination. Both sides claimed victory. Both sides recognized they had failed to achieve their objectives. But for HMS Renown, the engagement demonstrated something fundamental about her role in the Mediterranean theater. She was the only British capital ship fast enough to operate with aircraft carriers, the only heavy ship capable of catching Italian cruisers, and the only battlecruiser available to counter Italian battleships when they sortied. She was also obsolete, outgunned by modern battleships, inadequately armored for fleet actions, and operating at the absolute limit of her capabilities against newer, faster, better protected opponents. Renown would spend the next 4 years proving that obsolete did not mean useless. HMS Renown was laid down at Fairfield Shipbuilding and Engineering Company in Govan, Scotland, on January 25, 1915. She was one of 2 Renown-class battlecruisers ordered as an emergency response to German battlecruiser construction. First, Lord of the Admiralty. Winston Churchill personally drove the design, demanding maximum speed and firepower with minimal attention to armor protection. The design reflected Churchill's philosophy of battlecruiser warfare. Speed was protection. A ship fast enough to choose when to fight could avoid unfavorable engagements. A ship fast enough to run down cruisers and commerce raiders did not need the armor to slug it out with battleships. These assumptions would prove catastrophically wrong at the Battle of Jutland in 1916, when 3 British battlecruisers exploded and sank after German shells penetrated their inadequate armor. But in 1915, the Admiralty wanted speed and wanted it immediately. Renown's hull was laid down, built, launched, and commissioned in 20 months. She was commissioned on September 20, 1916, the fastest battlecruiser construction in British naval history. She displaced 26,500 tons, standard 3,835 tons, fully loaded. Her dimensions were 794 feet in length, 90 feet in beam, 25.5 feet in draft. Her main battery consisted of 6 15-inch Mark I guns in 3 twin turrets, 2 forward and 1 aft. Her secondary battery included 17 4-inch guns for defense against destroyers and aircraft. Her armor protection was minimal by battleship standards. Belt armor was 6 inches thick at the waterline, tapering to 3 inches above and below. Turret faces were 11 inches thick. The deck armor was 3 inches over magazines, 1.5 inches elsewhere. This protection was adequate against cruiser-caliber shells, but vulnerable to battleship-caliber weapons. Her machinery consisted of 42 Babcock and Wilcox boilers, driving 4 Brown Curtis-geared steam turbines. The system generated 112,000 dealer shaft horsepower, driving Renown to a maximum speed of 32.5 knots during trials. This made her one of the fastest capital ships in the world in 1916, fast enough to catch any cruiser, fast enough to escape any battleship. Renown's wartime service during World War I was limited. She was completed too late for Jutland and spent most of her time with the Grand Fleet conducting patrols in the North Sea. She never engaged German capital ships. Her most notable action was a brief exchange of fire with German light cruisers in November 1917, during which Renown fired 18 rounds from her 15-inch guns without scoring hits. After World War I, Renown was placed in reserve like most of the Royal Navy's capital ships. The Washington Naval Treaty of 1922 limited battleship construction, but existing ships could be modernized within treaty restrictions. Between 1923 and 1926, Renown underwent her first major reconstruction at Portsmouth Dockyard. The reconstruction focused on improving armor protection and anti-aircraft armament. The deck armor over magazines was increased from 3 inches to 5 inches. Additional armor was added to the turret roofs and barbettes. The anti-aircraft battery was upgraded from 4 3-inch guns to 6 4.7-inch guns. The bridge structure was enlarged to accommodate additional command and control equipment. These improvements increased displacement to 30,750 tons standard, slightly over the treaty limit, but within the allowed margin for modernization. Speed decreased slightly to 29.5 knots due to the additional weight. Renown remained in service through the 1920s and early 1930s, conducting training cruises, showing the flag in Commonwealth ports and participating in fleet exercises. She was a prestigious command flagship of the battlecruiser squadron, when that organization existed, a symbol of British naval power, even as she aged and newer ships entered service. In 1936, Renown entered Devonport Dockyard for her second major reconstruction. This rebuild was far more extensive than the first, effectively creating a new ship within the old hull. The work took 3 years and cost £388,000 more than the original construction cost in 1915. The reconstruction stripped Renown to her hull and rebuilt everything above the waterline. The bridge structure was completely replaced with a modern tower containing improved fire control equipment and command facilities. The machinery was updated with new boilers and turbines, generating 120,000 shaft horsepower, restoring speed to 30.5 knots, despite the increased displacement. The armor scheme was dramatically improved. Belt armor was increased to 9 inches at the waterline. Deck armor was increased to 6.5 inches over magazines and machinery. Turret faces were increased to 13 inches. The additional armor increased displacement to 32,000 tons, standard 36,080 tons, fully loaded. The anti-aircraft armament was modernized to meet the air threat that had emerged since World War I. The old 4.7-inch guns were removed. 20 4.5-inch dual-purpose guns in 10 twin mounts were installed, capable of engaging both aircraft and surface targets. 24 2-pounder pom-poms in 3 octuple mounts provided close-range anti-aircraft defense. The main battery remained unchanged. The 6 15-inch guns were retained in their original configuration. These weapons could fire a 1,920-pound armor-piercing shell to a maximum range of 33 yards. Rate of fire was approximately 2 rounds per minute per gun under ideal conditions. Renown emerged from reconstruction in September 1939, 1 week after Germany invaded Poland. She was assigned to the Home Fleet and immediately deployed on convoy escort duties in the North Atlantic. Her first combat action of World War II came on April 9, 1940, during the German invasion of Norway. Renown was operating off the Lofoten Islands when she encountered the German battlecruisers Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, escorting troop transports to Narvik. The engagement began at 4 hours in heavy seas, with snow squalls reducing visibility to 4,000 yards. Renown detected the German ships on radar and opened fire at 5 hours at a range of 18,600 yards. The first salvo straddled Gneisenau, sending fragments across her deck. The second salvo hit Gneisenau on the forward turret face, penetrating the 14-inch armor and jamming the turret. Gneisenau turned away, making smoke. Scharnhorst engaged Renown at 10 hours, firing at 16,000 yards. One 11-inch shell from Scharnhorst struck Renown on the foremast, destroying radar equipment and starting a fire. Another shell penetrated the hull above the waterline and exploded in a crew compartment, killing 1 man and wounding 3 others. The engagement continued for 20 minutes as the ships maneuvered in deteriorating weather. At 4:25 hours, a massive wave struck Renown's bow, smashing over the forecastle and flooding into A turret through the open barbette. Water poured into the turret, shorting electrical systems and flooding the working chamber. The turret was put out of action for 30 minutes while crews pumped out the water. Admiral Wilhelm Marschall, commanding the German force from Gneisenau, decided to withdraw rather than risk further damage. Both German battlecruisers turned north and opened range at maximum speed. Renown pursued for 2 hours but could not close the distance. The Germans escaped into Norwegian waters, where British ships could not follow without entering neutral territorial waters. The action off Norway demonstrated Renown's strengths and weaknesses. She could engage modern German battlecruisers on approximately equal terms. Her 15-inch guns could penetrate their armor. Her speed was sufficient to maintain contact, but her armor was still inadequate. The 11-inch shell that penetrated her hull would have been deflected by heavier armor. The wave damage to A turret revealed that the forecastle was too low for operations in heavy seas. After Norway, Renown was assigned to Force H, based at Gibraltar. This was a critical posting. Force H was the Royal Navy's primary striking force in the Western Mediterranean, responsible for escorting convoys attacking Italian shipping and containing the Italian fleet. Vice Admiral James Somerville commanded Force H from July 1940 through March 1942. His flagship was HMS Renown. The force typically included the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal, the cruiser HMS Sheffield, and 6 to 8 destroyers. This was the force that would fight the inconclusive action off Cape Spartanto in November 1940. The strategic situation in the Mediterranean in late 1940 was desperate for Britain. Italy had entered the war in June. The Italian Navy had 6 battleships, 19 cruisers, and over 60 destroyers based in ports across Sicily, Sardinia, and mainland Italy. The French Navy, which had been Britain's ally in the Mediterranean, was now neutral after France's surrender. Some French ships had been seized by Britain, others had been neutralized in French ports, but all were unavailable for operations. Britain had 2 battleships in the Mediterranean fleet based at Alexandria, Egypt, and Force H at Gibraltar. That was all. These forces had to escort convoys, attack Italian shipping, support land forces in North Africa, and prevent the Italian fleet from dominating the Mediterranean. Renown's role in this strategic equation was disproportionate to her age and capabilities. She was the only British capital ship in the Western Mediterranean fast enough to escort aircraft carriers which required speeds of 28-30 knots for flight operations. The battleships at Alexandria were slower, capable of 21-23 knots, too slow to operate effectively with carriers. This meant Renown escorted every carrier operation Force H conducted. When Ark Royal launched strikes against Italian targets, Renown provided anti-aircraft defense and surface protection. When Italian battleships sortied to intercept British convoys, Renown was the heavy ship available to engage them. The engagement off Cape Spartanto on November 27, 1940, was typical of these operations. Force H was escorting a convoy from Gibraltar to Malta and Alexandria. The convoy included 3 merchant ships carrying ammunition, fuel, and supplies to British forces in the eastern Mediterranean. Italian reconnaissance aircraft spotted the convoy on November 26 and reported its composition to the Italian Naval Command. Admiral Angelo Iachino, commanding the Italian fleet, sortied from Naples on November 26 with the battleships Vittorio Veneto and Giulio Cesare, 6 heavy cruisers, 14 light cruisers, and 20 destroyers. His mission was to intercept and destroy the British convoy before it reached Malta. Somerville learned of the Italian sortie through signals intelligence intercepts. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park had partially broken Italian naval codes and could read some operational traffic. The intercepts indicated a major Italian fleet movement, but did not specify the exact composition or timing. Somerville positioned Force H between the convoy and the expected Italian approach. Renown Ark Royal Sheffield and 8 destroyers formed a screen northwest of the convoy. The plan was to use Ark Royal's aircraft to locate the Italian fleet, then position Renown to engage the enemy battleships while the convoy escaped south toward Malta. At 09:10 hours on November 27th, Ark Royal's reconnaissance aircraft spotted the Italian fleet 60 miles northwest of Force H. The contact report identified 2 battleships, 6 cruisers, and multiple destroyers steaming southeast at 25 knots. This was the force Somerville had expected, but it was larger and more powerful than he had hoped. Somerville made his decision immediately. He would take Renown Sheffield and 6 destroyers northwest to engage the Italian battleships, while the convoy continued southeast under escort of the remaining 2 destroyers. The mission was not to sink the Italian ships, but to delay them long enough for the convoy to escape. This was a calculated risk. Renown alone was inferior to either Italian battleship in firepower and protection. Vittorio Veneto had 9 15-inch guns compared to Renown's 6. She had 13.8-inch belt armor compared to Renown's 9 inches. She was 3 years old modern in every respect, while Renown was 24 years old despite her reconstructions. But Somerville believed the Italians would withdraw rather than risk damage far from their bases. Italian naval doctrine emphasized preserving the fleet, avoiding decisive engagements, operating cautiously. If Renown could engage at long range and inflict any damage, the Italians would likely break off rather than press the attack. The assumption was correct, but only barely. Renown worked up to 30 knots, steaming northwest on an intercept course. The range closed steadily. At 11:30 hours, Renown's lookouts spotted smoke on the horizon. At 11:45 hours, the Italian fleet was visible from Renown's bridge, 2 large ships and multiple smaller vessels. At 1200 hours, Renown's fire control radar detected the lead battleship at 28,000 yards. Somerville ordered Renown to open fire at 1207 hours when the range closed to 26,400 yards. This was near maximum effective range, but waiting for a closer range would allow the Italians to engage first. Renown's 6 15-inch guns fired in 3 2-gun salvos at 15-second intervals. The opening salvos fell short, as described earlier. The third salvo hit Vittorio Veneto with 1 shell. Admiral Campioni immediately turned away, ordering his fleet to retire northwest toward Italian bases. He did not want to risk a prolonged engagement with British forces that included an aircraft carrier. Ark Royal's torpedo bombers could attack while Renown engaged with gunfire, and Italian fleet doctrine did not consider such risks acceptable. Renown fired 9 salvos, 54 rounds of 15-inch ammunition, scoring 1 hit. Vittorio Veneto fired 4 salvos, 36 rounds of 15-inch ammunition, scoring no hits. The engagement lasted 8 minutes and ended with both forces turning away, neither willing to close to decisive range. The heavy cruisers on both sides exchanged fire at 20,000 to 25,000 yards, with no hits scored. The Italian cruisers launched torpedoes at extreme range, all of which missed. Sheffield engaged the Italian cruisers with her 6-inch guns, firing 114 rounds without effect. By 12:30 hours, the range had opened to 35,000 yards, and contact was lost. Somerville turned Force H south to rejoin the convoy. The Italians continued northwest and were back in Naples by November 28th. The strategic outcome favored Britain. The convoy reached Malta safely on November 28th, delivering its cargo without loss. The Italian fleet had been driven off without achieving its objective. British command of the Mediterranean convoy routes was maintained, but the tactical engagement was inconclusive. Renown had landed one hit that caused minimal damage. The Italians had escaped intact. Neither side had demonstrated superiority in gunnery or tactics. British press reports claimed a major victory, describing how Renown had driven off 2 modern battleships. Italian press reports claimed a major victory, describing how their fleet had forced British ships to retreat. Both were propaganda. The truth was that both sides had maneuvered cautiously, fired at extreme range, and withdrawn when continued engagement seemed too risky. For Renown, Cape Spartanto was the high point of her Mediterranean service. She would never again engage enemy battleships, but she would escort dozens of convoys, provide gunfire support for amphibious landings, and serve as Force H flagship for another year. In May 1941, Renown participated in the hunt for the German battleship Bismarck. When Bismarck broke into the Atlantic, every available British capital ship was deployed to intercept her. Renown was detached from Force H and sent north to cover potential routes Bismarck might take toward German-occupied French ports. Renown never made contact with Bismarck. The German battleship was tracked by cruisers attacked by carrier aircraft, and finally sunk by battleships Rodney and King George V before Renown could join the engagement. But the deployment demonstrated Renown's strategic value. She was fast enough to cover wide areas, powerful enough to engage German capital ships if contact was made, and available when newer ships were committed elsewhere. In December 1941, Renown was detached from Force H and sent to the Indian Ocean as flagship of Force Z. This was a desperate response to Japanese expansion in Southeast Asia. Force Z originally consisted of the battleship HMS Prince of Wales, the battlecruiser HMS Repulse, and 4 destroyers. The force was sent to Singapore to deter Japanese aggression. Renown was supposed to join Force Z and provide additional firepower. She departed Gibraltar on December 4, 1941, bound for Cape Town and then Singapore. But on December 10, Japanese aircraft sank Prince of Wales and Repulse off the Malayan coast. Force Z ceased to exist before Renown could join. Renown continued to Cape Town and was reassigned to the Eastern Fleet based in Ceylon, modern-day Sri Lanka. She served in the Indian Ocean from January to July 1942, escorting convoys, conducting patrols, and providing gunfire support for operations against Madagascar. In July 1942, Renown returned to Britain for a major refit. She entered Rosyth Dockyard and remained there until September 1943. The refit focused on improving anti-aircraft armament and radar equipment. The 4.5-inch guns were retained, but additional 20mm Oerlikon guns were installed, bringing the total light anti-aircraft armament to 34 barrels. New radar equipment included Type 273 surface search radar, Type 281 air search radar, and Type 284 fire control radar for the main battery. The radar fit made Renown one of the most comprehensively equipped capital ships in the Royal Navy for electronic warfare. After the refit, Renown was assigned to the home fleet. She participated in operations covering Arctic convoys to the Soviet Union, conducted patrols in Norwegian waters, and served as flagship for various task forces. Her role was diminished compared to earlier war years. Newer battleships were available. King George V-class ships were faster, more heavily armed, and better protected. Renown was increasingly relegated to secondary duties. In January 1944, Renown participated in Operation Tungsten, a carrier strike against the German battleship Tirpitz in Norwegian waters. Renown provided cover for the carriers but did not engage enemy forces. The strike damaged Tirpitz but did not sink her. Renown's final combat operation came in June 1945, 3 months after Germany's surrender. She was sent to Ceylon to join the British Pacific Fleet for operations against Japan. She arrived too late to participate in combat. Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945, before Renown reached operational areas. After the war, Renown was assigned to training duties. She served as a cadet training ship for the Royal Naval College at Dartmouth, conducting summer cruises with midshipmen, learning navigation, seamanship, and gunnery. This role continued until 1948, when she was placed in reserve. Renown was decommissioned on July 18, 1945, but remained in reserve until 1948. She was sold for scrap on August 4, 1948 to Metal Industries Ltd. Scrapping began at Faslane, Scotland in March 1948 and was completed by 1949. Several artifacts were preserved. The ship's bell was saved and is displayed at the Royal Navy Museum in Portsmouth. A section of 15-inch gun barrel was preserved and is displayed at the Imperial War Museum. The ship's nameplate was saved and is displayed at the National Museum of the Royal Navy. HMS Renown earned 6 battle honors for World War II service: Norway, 1940, Spartanto, 1940, Mediterranean, 1940-41, Bismarck, 1941, Indian Ocean, 1942, and Arctic, 1943-44. She fired her main battery in anger on 9 occasions, engaging German and Italian warships, shore targets, and aircraft. She was hit by enemy fire 3 times, once by an 11-inch shell from Scharnhorst in April 1940, once by bomb fragments during an Italian air attack in January 1941, and once by a near-miss bomb during a German air attack in February 1944. No hits penetrated her armored citadel. All damage was to unarmored portions of the superstructure or deck. The armor installed during her 1936-39 reconstruction proved adequate against the threats she faced, though she was never tested by sustained combat against modern battleships at close range. Renown's combat record must be understood in context. She was designed as a battlecruiser in 1915, rebuilt as a fast battleship in 1936-39, and operated throughout World War II in roles she was marginally qualified to perform. She engaged modern battleships that outgunned her escorted carriers while providing inadequate anti-aircraft defense by 1944 standards, and served in every theater from Norway to the Indian Ocean. She survived because she was fast enough to choose when to fight, lucky enough to avoid decisive engagements with superior forces, and operated by commanders who understood her limitations and used her accordingly. Vice Admiral Somerville's deployment of Renown at Cape Spartanto exemplified this approach. He knew Renown could not defeat 2 Italian battleships in sustained combat. But he also knew the Italians would not risk damage far from home. By closing to firing range and inflicting token damage, he achieved his strategic objective, protecting the convoy without exposing Renown to destruction. This was how obsolete ships remained useful in modern warfare. Not by fighting fleet actions, but by presence, by threat, by forcing enemies to react cautiously rather than aggressively. Renown represented the last generation of battlecruiser ships that were neither fast enough to avoid modern battleships nor strong enough to fight them on equal terms. The type was obsolete by 1940, but individual ships remained valuable when used within their capabilities. HMS Renown, pennant number 72, length 794 feet. Displacement 36 over 80 tons, crew 200 men. The battlecruiser from the old war that fought in the new one. The ship that engaged Scharnhorst and Gneisenau in Norwegian waters, that fought Italian battleships in the Mediterranean, that escorted convoys across 3 oceans. 6 battle honors, 9 combat engagements, 29 years of service from 1916 to 1945. The duel of the old guard, where experience and careful deployment mattered more than technical superiority. The ship that survived because she knew when to fight and when to run.